The purification valve was stuck, which was typical for equipment that spent its existence being corroded by minerals the original designers never anticipated. Jarek applied more torque to the wrench, felt the bolt start to give, and reminded himself that breaking things would just make the repair take longer. Harder counterclockwise rotation, Mirae said from her position, bracing the pipe assembly. The thread pitch is reversed on these colonial-era installations. I know it's reversed. I designed the replacement protocol. Jarek adjusted his grip and tried again. The bolt surrendered with a metallic shriek that echoed through the transit sector. Got it. Mirae made a sound that might have been approval or just acknowledgement. Hard to tell with Civilian, they were economical with emotional displays in professional settings. She'd worked beside him for 3 months now, her technical knowledge sharp enough that Jarek had stopped double-checking her calculations after the first week. Her people had been maintaining water systems on this moon for generations before humans arrived with their treaties and their terraforming ambitions. Made sense that their engineers knew what they were doing. She moved to inspect the valve housing, her long ears tilting back in concentration. Jarek had learned not to stare at those ears, which swept from her head in elegant curves that human genetics didn't produce. Civilian looked almost human until you noticed details like that. The ears, the slight iridescence of their skin in certain light, the extra joint in their fingers that made their movements unnaturally fluid. We'll need to replace the entire assembly, Mirae said, running her fingers over corroded metal. This has maybe another week before catastrophic failure. Fantastic. I'll add it to the list of things that should have been replaced years ago, but weren't because budgets. Jarek pulled up the inventory on his datapad. We can get the parts by. He stopped because Mirae's tool harness was coming apart. The main strap had frayed to the point where individual threads were visible, and as she leaned forward to examine the valve, the remaining fibers stretched ominously. Your harness is about to fail, Jarek said. She glanced down at the fraying strap. I know, requisition for a new one is still processing, takes time. We're 30 feet up, if that breaks while you're moving. I'm aware of the safety implications. I'm being careful. Jarek looked at the failing strap, at the metal grating they were standing on, at the drop that would hurt regardless of how careful someone was being. Then he unclipped his spare harness from his belt, the backup he always carried because equipment failed and preparation mattered, and held it out to her. Use this one until your requisition processes. Mirae stared at the harness in his outstretched hand. She didn't move to take it. Her ears pressed flat against her head in a gesture Jarek had never seen from her before, and her gray eyes went wide like he'd just done something shocking. It's just a spare, he said, confused by her reaction. I have my primary harness. You need a working one. Basic safety protocol. She still didn't take it. Jarek glanced around and realized other civilian workers in the sector had stopped what they were doing. They were all staring, at him, at Mirae, at the harness suspended between them. One of them, an older engineer whose name Jarek had never learned, said something in rapid civilian that he didn't understand. Mirae responded in the same language, her voice tight. Mirae, Jarek lowered the harness slightly. Did I do something wrong? No, she reached out and took the harness with hands that shook slightly. No, you didn't, thank you. But she said it like someone receiving something far more significant than a piece of safety equipment, and she wouldn't meet his eyes. Jarek watched her clip the harness on, watched her hands still trembling slightly, and felt increasingly certain that he'd somehow violated a protocol he'd never been briefed on. They finished the repair in silence. Mirae's movements were even more precise than usual, like she was concentrating very hard on being professional. When they descended to ground level and Jarek suggested they review the replacement schedule, she made an excuse about another assignment and left quickly. Too quickly. Jarek stood in the transit sector, surrounded by water systems he understood completely and a cultural interaction he didn't understand at all, wondering what exactly he'd just done. The summons to the civilian liaison office came the next morning, delivered via official channels that suggested this wasn't optional. Jarek reported at the specified time, was directed to a formal meeting room, and found Elder Nethas waiting, the diplomatic coordinator responsible for maintaining treaty compliance between human colonists and indigenous civilian. Engineer Hallen, thank you for coming. Nethas gestured to a chair designed for civilian proportions that made Jarek feel undersized. I need to discuss yesterday's incident in the transit sector. If this is about the valve replacement delays, I've already filed the necessary complaints with colonial administration. This is about the harness you offered Mirae. Jarek paused halfway through sitting down. The safety harness. Yes. Nethas folded their hands on the desk with the kind of careful precision that suggested this conversation had been planned. I need to understand your relationship with Engineer Solin and your intentions regarding the gesture you made. My intentions were preventing a workplace accident. Her harness was failing. Mine wasn't. I offered her the spare. Jarek finished sitting, feeling like he was being interrogated for something he still didn't understand. Is that against protocol? I checked the safety regulations, and there's nothing prohibiting equipment sharing between species. This isn't about regulations, it's about meaning. Nethas studied him with eyes that had probably negotiated treaties before Jarek was born. Among my people, personal protective equipment carries significance. We don't share such things casually. Why not? Because to offer someone your own safety gear is to make a statement. You're saying their well-being matters more than your own, that you trust them enough to be vulnerable, that you acknowledge them as someone worthy of protection. Nethas paused. We call this Ethkin, the shielding gift. It carries implications. Jarek felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of implications? Traditionally, Ethkin is reserved for family, or for those one is courting. It's a gesture of deep personal regard. Nethas's expression was unreadable. When you offered Mirae your harness in front of witnesses, you performed Ethkin, whether you intended to or not. I was following safety protocols. I understand that, but intention doesn't change interpretation. The civilian community witnessed your gesture and drew conclusions about your relationship with Mirae. Those conclusions are now spreading through both communities. Jarek leaned back in the too small chair. What kind of conclusions? That you've declared interest in courting her. That you value her highly enough to offer protection at cost to yourself. That you see her as someone significant. Nethas tilted their head. These conclusions would be accurate if you performed Ethkin with full understanding of its meaning. But you didn't, which creates complications. Can I just explain it was a misunderstanding? Cultural ignorance. You can. Mirae could publicly dismiss your gesture as such. That would resolve the immediate social confusion. Nethas paused, but it would also publicly diminish the significance of what you offered. And based on Mirae's reaction yesterday, I'm not certain she wants that. What was her reaction? She accepted your Ethkin. She didn't refuse it, didn't explain your ignorance to witnesses, didn't treat it as anything less than what it appeared to be. Nethas's voice softened slightly. She protected the meaning of your gesture, even though she knew you didn't intend it. That suggests something about her feelings that I cannot speak to directly, as they're hers to share or not. Jarek processed this, so I accidentally proposed courtship using safety equipment. Essentially, yes. And now I need to either confirm that was my intention, or publicly deny it and embarrass both of us. Those are the primary options, though there are nuances. Nethas stood, signaling the conversation's end. I suggest you speak with Mirae directly, clarify what you meant and what you want. She deserves that clarity. Jarek left the liaison office feeling like he'd just learned his entire job had been one long cultural violation. He'd somehow avoided triggering until yesterday. He pulled up everything he could find about civilian customs, about Ethkin, about courtship protocols that apparently involved safety equipment and symbolic meanings he'd never considered. The research didn't help. It just made him realize how significant his thoughtless gesture had been. Mirae was avoiding him. Over the next 2 days, she rescheduled meetings, claimed urgent repairs in different sectors, and generally ensured they were never in the same location. Jarek finally caught her during a shift change in the maintenance bay when she couldn't escape without being obvious about it. We need to talk, he said, blocking the exit in a way that was probably rude but definitely effective. About what? But she knew, her ears pressed back slightly. About the harness, about Ethkin, about the fact that I apparently proposed courtship using safety equipment and didn't realize it until the next day. Jarek kept his voice low because the bay had other workers passing through. I talked to Elder Nethas. They explained what my gesture meant. I know what it meant, so why didn't you tell me? When I offered it, you could have explained right there. Mirae was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of a tool cabinet. Because I wanted to believe you meant it, even for a moment. even knowing you probably didn't. The admission hung between them. Jarek felt something shift in his chest. Why would you want that? Because I've spent 3 months working beside you, respecting your competence, appreciating that you treat civil engineers as equals rather than primitive locals who need human expertise. Her voice was steady but quiet. And noticing things I shouldn't notice about a human colleague. The way you concentrate when solving problems. How you apologize to equipment when you have to dismantle it. That you bring me coffee during long repairs, even though you drink tea yourself, and think coffee is bitter. You notice that. I notice many things. She finally looked at him directly. When you offered me your harness, your protection, your trust, your acknowledgement that my safety mattered, it resonated with everything my people taught me to value. And I wanted it to be real, even if it was just human practicality, pretending to be something more. Jarek leaned against the tool cabinet beside her. What if it wasn't just practicality? What do you mean? I mean, I noticed you months ago that I've been finding excuses to work on your projects specifically. That offering you the harness felt automatic, but maybe it wasn't quite as thoughtless as I pretended. He met her eyes. I didn't know what Ethkin meant, but I'm not entirely surprised that caring about your safety carried meaning. Murray's ears tilted forward slightly, hope he'd learned from his research. You're saying you meant it. I'm saying I did not mean it, if that makes sense. That's not very clear. I know, I'm working on clarity here. Jarek ran his hand through his hair. Look, I didn't intend to declare courtship with a spare harness, but I'm also not upset that it happened. Because you're brilliant and funny in a dry way I didn't recognize until you explained your humor was deliberate, and you care about these water systems like they're living things worth protecting. They are worth protecting. Millions depend on them. See that passion, that's. He stopped because words felt inadequate. I like you, I have for months. I just assumed cross-species interest was complicated or unwelcome. It's complicated. She moved closer, her formal posture softening, but not unwelcome, at least not to me. What happens now? That depends. Do you want to confirm the Ethkin, or dismiss it publicly as misunderstanding? She held his gaze. Both options have consequences. Confirmation means entering civil courtship traditions, meeting my family, following protocols that will seem elaborate. Dismissal means we return to being colleagues and nothing more. Jarek thought about safe options, about simple professional relationships, about all the ways this could become complicated. Then he thought about Mirae explaining reversed thread pitches with genuine enthusiasm, about her careful hands repairing equipment, about 3 months of noticing someone he'd been trying not to notice. I want to confirm it. The Ethkin, the courtship, whatever this becomes. He smiled despite his nerves. Fair warning, I know nothing about civil courtship traditions. I'm going to make mistakes. You already made the most important gesture correctly. She reached out and took his hand, her extra finger joints making the grip feel different but not wrong. Everything else we can learn together. Someone dropped a tool in another part of the bay, the clang echoing loudly. They both jumped, then laughed at their own nervousness. So what's the next step in civil courtship? Jarek asked. Usually the person who offered Ethkin would meet the recipient's family to demonstrate sincerity and discuss intentions. Murray's ears tilted back slightly. My parents are traditional. They'll have questions about human cultural practices and whether you understand what you're committing to. That sounds terrifying. It usually is. But you survived accidentally proposing via safety equipment. Comparatively, family meetings should be manageable. Murray's family lived in the civil residential sector, where architecture favored natural stone and integrated water features that served both aesthetic and practical cooling purposes. Jarek felt conspicuously human walking through streets designed for people with different proportions and different sensibilities about personal space. Her parents, Setha and Coral Solin, received him with formal courtesy that bordered on cold assessment. They asked pointed questions about his intentions, his understanding of civil culture, his awareness that Ethkin implied long-term commitment rather than casual interest. Jarek answered honestly. He was learning, he respected their traditions even when he didn't fully understand them, and his gesture had been genuine even if accidentally symbolic. Setha studied him for a long moment. You offered my daughter protection without knowing what it meant. Some would say that invalidates the Ethkin. Some would say it makes it more valid, Coral countered. He saw her in danger and responded from instinct. Instinct reveals character more honestly than practiced gestures. He could have simply reminded her to be careful, or reported the equipment failure to supervisors. He didn't need to offer his own gear. But he did, that's the point. Coral turned to Jarek. Why didn't you just report the failing harness? Because reporting takes time. Forms, approvals, processing. Her harness could have failed before any of that helped. Jarek met their eyes. I had a solution immediately available. Using it seemed obvious. Practical, Setha said. Caring, Coral corrected. There's a difference. Mirae, who had been sitting silently through this interrogation, finally spoke. Father's right. Jarek could have taken the practical option with no risk to himself. He chose differently. Her parents exchanged a look that probably communicated volumes Jarek couldn't interpret. Then Setha's expression softened fractionally. Very well. If Mirae accepts your Ethkin with full understanding, we won't oppose the courtship. But know that our community will be watching. Human-civilian partnerships are uncommon. You'll face scrutiny. I'm used to scrutiny, Jarek said. I'm an engineer. Everything I build gets inspected by people looking for failures. Coral laughed, a short, surprised sound. I like him, Setha. You like everyone who makes engineering metaphors. Because engineers understand that relationships, like systems, require constant maintenance and honest assessment of structural integrity. Mirae caught Jarek's eye and smiled, and he realized her father was absolutely right. Over the following weeks, Jarek learned civilian courtship customs while teaching Mirae about human ones. He discovered that civilian partnerships involved elaborate gift exchanges, each item carrying symbolic weight that needed careful consideration. Mirae learned that humans often courted through shared activities and gradual emotional revelation rather than formal protocols. Both found ways to bridge the gaps. The human community had mixed reactions. Some approved, seeing it as positive cross-cultural integration. Others questioned whether Jarek understood what he'd gotten into, whether the relationship would last, whether mixing species was appropriate. Jarek ignored them mostly, focusing instead on Mirae's dry humor, her passion for hydraulic engineering, the way her ears tilted forward when she was happy. 3 months after the accidental Ethkin, Jarek commissioned a custom safety harness, designed specifically for Mirae's proportions, reinforced beyond standard specifications, with modifications he'd personally calculated for her typical work environments. He presented it during a formal gathering of both communities, following the traditional protocol for confirmed Ethkin that Elder Nethas had carefully explained. Mirae accepted the harness with tears in her eyes and ears tilted fully forward in joy. She put it on immediately, testing the fit, examining the modifications with an engineer's appreciation for thoughtful design. It's perfect, she said. It should last years, though you'll probably find ways to stress it beyond specifications because you're terrible at avoiding dangerous repairs. I'm thorough, not reckless. You're both, which is why you need quality equipment. He smiled. Also, I care whether you fall off things. I know, that's why it matters. She kissed him in front of both communities, a public acknowledgement that would have scandalized traditional civilian 3 months ago, but now just drew approving murmurs. Later, in private, Mirae asked him if he ever regretted the accidental Ethkin, the gesture that had complicated his life and thrust him into cultural protocols he hadn't anticipated. Jarek thought about it honestly. No, I regret not knowing what it meant when I offered it, but I don't regret offering it, or what came after. Even though it forced you into courtship protocols that must seem elaborate and unnecessary. Even though, he took her hand, still careful of that extra joint, still fascinated by the slight differences between their physiologies. You were right that first day. I noticed you months ago. I just needed safety equipment failure to push me into actually doing something about it. Very romantic. Our relationship began with equipment failure. All the